Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Palestinian leaders frequently and in utmost secrecy ferry their loved ones to receive medical treatment in Israeli hospitals. They do not tell their people and they do not tell the Arab world. But when they need medical care, they reach out for the best medical care in the world, Israel. Some will call it hypocrisy, some expediency. When a loved one is ill, politics and enemies all fall by the wayside. It's a game changer. The cloak of secrecy is mandated because, in the Arab world, the optics would not look good at all. After all, Israel is portrayed as the oppressor, the evil persecutor, the murderer of Palestinians. How would it look across the world if it were known that the privileged Palestinians utilized the skills of the forbidden and cursed Jewish Zionist state? Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas's younger brother, Abu Luwai, was recently treated in an Israeli hospital. It was Asuta Hospital, a private hospital in Tel Aviv. Abu Luwai is 76 years old and suffers from cancer. He lives in Qatar. The PA press has not and probably will not publish this information. Neither will the rest of the Arabic press, should they ever get the news. The decision by the brother of the Palestinian president to enter an Israeli hospital is not surprising. He is just one of many. In fact, last year, Abbas's brother-in-law was admitted to an Israeli medical facility to undergo heart surgery. The surgery was determined to be essential and a matter of life and death. And last June, Abbas's wife had surgery in the very same hospital. But good medical care in Israeli hospitals, delivered by great Jewish doctors, is not restricted to Abbas's family alone. The list of Palestinian elite and their family members, including family members of Hamas leaders, have entered Israeli hospitals to get help and to have their lives saved by Israeli medical teams, and it's a very long list. Israeli healthcare is arguably one of the best in the world. And when it comes to the life and death of loved ones, of the leadership, of the arch enemies of Israel, or those who are trying to pressure Israel at the United Nations, in the international court and around the world, will, quote, use, unquote, Israel. Unfortunately, these leaders hide the truth from the masses. The reality is that if there were peace, Israeli knowledge, technology, and healthcare could easily be shared with the Palestinians. What is good for the proverbial goose is not, in this case, good for the gander. While the man on the Palestinian street is taught to both fear and loathe everything Israel and Israeli, Palestinian leadership breaks their own rules when it comes to the welfare of their families. Ismail Hania's daughter, a woman in her 20s, was brought to Israel in an emergency situation and admitted to Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv. She was airlifted after a routine operation in Gaza went wrong. Hania is the undisputed leader of Hamas in Gaza. Hania's sister was treated in an Israeli hospital several years ago following an emergency. He also brought his granddaughter to Israel for care after she had an emergency. The girl was helicoptered from Gaza to the hospital. All these cases were considered humanitarian medical acts, and yet, despite all the care his family has received, despite all the care any Palestinian receives in Israeli medical institutions, at this very moment, Abbas is still on his high horse, shouting to all who will hear that Israel is executing and murdering Palestinians, that Israeli settlers and the IDF are murderers. The strangest part of this story is that if there were some relationship and interaction, if Palestinian leaders could bring themselves to model cooperative behavior, all Palestinians would benefit from Israeli medicine and their technology, not just the privileged few. Jerusalem hospitals are striking examples of Israelis and Palestinians interacting as patients staff, and medical professionals. Arabs and Jews work together and are treated next to each other. But in Jerusalem, they also live together. Ironic? Typical? I'm still undecided. Did I mention that Israeli soldiers regularly risk their own lives under the cover of darkness to rescue wounded Syrian rebel fighters and bring them to Israel for medical treatment? Don't expect to read about that in the Arab press either. And now, Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad are shooting mortars from Gaza into Israel. The mortar attacks are a direct result of Israel's discovery of another underground terror tunnel. The logic works like this. Israel is searching for the tunnels, and Hamas is shooting at them to slow the process down. It is clear that Hamas and Israel do not want the situation to escalate into a war. But Hamas has a serious question to answer. Because Israel is searching and has found 2 tunnels within 10 days, Hamas is in danger of losing one of its most effective weapons. Should Hamas abandon the weapon, or will they use it, as they can, in order to attack Israel before they lose it totally? The reason Hamas does not want to escalate this is because they're not prepared for an all-out conflict similar to the conflict of 2 summers ago. So Hamas is taking the middle position. They're hitting Israel and hoping not to escalate at the same time. Israel struck back with their air force. Thus far, this is not a significant change in the status quo, but it is a balancing act. Hamas is counting on knowing the proper calculus, one that will not break the paradigm. If Hamas pushes too hard, it could force Israel's hand, and Hamas fully understands that. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. Both columns deal with the exact same topic, anti-Semitism in Britain's Labour Party. The subject has not been dealt with well in the US press or in Europe. Obviously, the Hebrew press in Israel has focused on the anti-Semitism. But I'm surprised that very few major networks or major mainstream newspapers or websites have covered or dealt with this subject. I say this not because I'm a Jew and very sensitive to anti-Semitism. I say this because anti-Semitism is the litmus test for freedom or hatred, for racism or integration into the modern world. The notion that the opposition party in Great Britain could have people publicly pronouncing anti-Semitic canards is beyond belief in the year 2016. Some of them were censured, others were suspended from the party, but the ugly head of anti-Semitism is now very much there, and the tone is still very much in the air. First up is a column by Ben Dror Yemini, an Israeli columnist who writes for Yediot Achronot. Yediot is the largest circulation for sale newspaper in Israel today. There's a larger for free paper owned by U.S. Jewish casino magnate, mega philanthropist Sheldon Adelson. His paper, by the way, is called Yisrael Hayom, Israel Today. Yemini is not a rightist or a leftist. He's a clear thinker. Sometimes he comes down on the left side of things, sometimes on the right side of things. He is unabashedly pro and proud of Israel and does not apologize for Israel's existence. He does not apologize for Israel's mistakes either. When Yemini sees a mistake by Israel, he calls it out very clearly. Yemini answers to his own moral compass. This column is a perfect example of that. The column was published May 2nd, online in the English edition of Yediot. The website is called ynetnews.com. It's entitled, Progress Doesn't Negate Horror. He begins by quoting a poignant snippet from a column in the British newspaper The Telegraph. I begin by quoting Yemini, who is quoting someone else. As a young boy, wrote Stephen Pollard in last weekend's Telegraph, I used to think my grandmother was very strange. In her bedroom, she kept a suitcase, packed and ready for use at a moment's notice. Just in case, she'd tell me when I asked where it was that she was always waiting to go. You never know when they'll turn on the Jews. At the time, Pollard didn't understand what she meant, since Jews in Britain were integrated and thriving. Lately, though, As the anti-Semitism coming out of the British left chills him to the bone, he's begun to understand her better. Yemini lays out the issue, and now he brings the topic to a head, giving examples to prove just how bad the anti-Semitism has gotten in the Labour Party. Quote, "There were telltale signs along the way, but it's easy to live in denial. What with Ken Livingstone, the former mayor of London, who was suspended from the Labour Party and is at the center of the current commotion, acting as official host to the anti-Semitic Muslim preacher Yusuf al-Qaradawi. Other Muslims warned him that this action will encourage other Muslim extremists. It made no difference to him. Al-Qaradawi, they told him, is an anti-Semite and the supporter of Hitler. He paid them no mind. So why is anyone surprised now that Livingstone is continuing down the same path?" I see Yemini's point. Can we imagine that a modern liberal democratic party would tolerate a member like Livingstone? It boggles the mind. Listen to more. Yemini continues. Over the weekend, Britain found itself in turmoil. It was no longer possible to hide the shame. Anti-Semitism has reared its head from within the bastions of the left. Now listen to what Yemini now quotes to prove his point. He says that the Labour Party leaders even write their anti-Semitism in the papers. Here Yemini quotes from a column written by Labour MP Mark Steele describing Israel as it was fighting Hamas 2 summers ago. He says that these Labour leaders are so warped, they see an Israel that does not exist. Yemini writes, quote, "It's because of the Israel they choose to describe, a child-murdering community," as Mark Steele wrote in The Independent. "If this is Israel, then it truly has no right to exist. But it isn't Israel. It's a blood libel," end quote. Just astounding. Here is how Yemini ends. He concludes saying that the British left is in denial and that there are real anti-Semites in their midst, but at least some people are starting to challenge it, and that gives him a sliver of hope. He concludes, quote, "The upside to the current disturbance lies in the fact that the discussion is being conducted at all, in which clear-headed and brave opinions are also heard. But this is only the beginning. It is doubtful that the British left will realize that the demonization of Israel and denying of Jews, and Jews alone, the right to self-definition, are the basis out of which a renewed anti-Semitism grows. This insight hasn't seeped in yet, and so the British left is in for a long and arduous withdrawal process, one that I will doubtfully see through." Wow. Second up is a column from the New York Post written by Benny Avni. Benny is an Israeli who has been in the States for decades, and he has written for some of the most important and influential papers in the States. He writes a regular column for the New York Post, mostly about foreign affairs. This piece appeared on May 3rd, 2016, and is entitled "The British Left, Anti-Semites Gone Wild." The online edition has a better headline: "Britain's Left is Melting Down Over Rampant Anti-Semitism." Benny Avni has a very similar but different take on the Labour Party than Ben Dror Yemini. Here is how he starts. If you think Hitler was a Zionist, you might be an anti-Semite. If you say problem solved, if Israel were transferred to mid-America, you might be an anti-Semite. If you live in Britain, you know the rest. The country's Labour Party, its second largest, is imploding. Its remaining decent members are calling almost daily to expel top party officials accused of anti-Semitism. Former London Mayor Red Ken Livingstone and the rising star Naz Shah, whose quotes, respectively, are above, have already been suspended. Avni says that the British Labour Party cannot and does not recognize the depths of their anti-Semitism. They excuse it as anti-Israel, and there is no distinction. The kind of vitriol and hate directed at Israel is not disagreement about policy, but her very existence. Here is how Avni concludes. People who do that say they're not anti-Semitic, just anti-Zionists. That Edward Said-inspired distinction is now a common cliche. But if you care more about some faraway dispute among Semites than about your own town's trash collection, well, you know. And why even bother to be an anti-Zionist, opposing a state for Jews while having no problem with one for Russians, Chinese, Persians, or for that matter, Palestinians? Congratulations, you might be an anti-Semite. Avni's correct. At this point, I can only hope that Europe will see the error of their ways. But unfortunately, it looks like anti-Semitism has been gaining strength there over the past few years and not disappearing. And that is frightening. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. There is a whole collection of cartoons this week. I must admit from the start that Trump and Clinton make it very difficult to find cartoons connected to our topics. They're not just the focus of the news, they're also so easy to make fun of. The cartoonists use them all the time, but I found some great ones nonetheless. This first cartoon comes from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It was published March 26, 2016, and is drawn by Rob Rogers. The cartoon portrays a little girl with a hobo stick and a pack over her shoulder. Her tattered dress reads, "Syrian refugee." The little girl is talking to a huge image dressed in black with a suicide belt and labeled Radical Islamic Terror. The little girl asks, "Can you please stop making the whole world hate Muslims?" The word "please" is underlined. The obvious comment is that because of Islamic terror, the innocent, needy refugees are suffering. But radical terrorists just don't care. The next cartoon follows the same theme of the fear of refugees. It's by Andy Marlette and published in the Pensacola News Journal and Creators.com. The cartoon is entitled Fear Itself. A father's at the window with a gun and a baseball bat. He's sweating and nervous and battening down the hatches of the house to keep it safe. The kid shouts at his father, "Dad, chill. I said cereal refill, please, not Syrian refugees." This is, of course, very funny. It's a mishear. Mishearing happens all the time when you're hypersensitive. The next cartoon is by Steve Benson and was published in the Arizona Republic and Creators.com. Benson makes fun of Obama and the Russian activity in the Middle East, especially in Syria, or for that matter, all over the world. The scene is a Russian fighter jet attacking Syria, setting it on fire. Obama is in the White House, and he sticks his head outside the window and shouts, "Hey, did I say you could do that?" Obviously, the play is that the Russians do whatever they want, and the White House makes a comment here and there, which has no impact. These last two cartoons are by Gary Varvel and were originally published in the Indianapolis Star. They are almost exactly the same in their point of view and their images. Both have Obama or Kerry playing a game. In the first cartoon, Kerry is playing the Iranian leader, the Ayatollah, the supreme leader himself. He's playing checkers, and the Ayatollah is playing chess with missiles as the pieces. Kerry says, "We've got him right where we want him." The Ayatollah is rubbing his hands, just waiting. The final and very last cartoon is very similar to this last one. It has Obama in the World Series of Poker. It's strip poker, obviously. Around the table playing with him are the Iranian Ayatollah, Assad of Syria, Putin of Russia, and the guy in black who is obviously and clearly ISIS. They all have piles of chips. In other words, they're winning, and they're fully clothed. Obama is down to his boxers and an A shirt and is taking off his gold watch. He has lost everything. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. ISIS has attacked and killed 8 Egyptian police in Cairo recently. The ISIS terrorists attacked a minibus filled with police, including an officer, a high-ranking officer. They killed everyone inside the vehicle and stole their weapons before running off. ISIS has claimed the responsibility, and there's no reason to doubt that. ISIS has long been active in the Sinai Desert, in the peninsula, and now they've expanded to the northern part of the Sinai. While they've attacked in the cities several times before, it has not been a regular occurrence. Their style in cities until now has been small attacks or explosions, not massive attacks against large numbers of police. This attack is a watershed event. Over the past few months, Egypt has been clamping down on the expansion of extremists, especially trying to stop ISIS. Egyptian fears are real, not imagined. They walk a very thin line when it comes to cracking down on the freedoms, and Egypt's extremists are using those freedoms to organize and popularize their particular points of view. Egypt understands the potential risks. This ISIS attack in Cairo and not in the Sinai proves just how important it is to keep the pressure up against ISIS. Back to England. Sadiq Khan has assumed his new job as mayor of London. Khan is a Muslim. His parents and grandparents came to England from Pakistan just before he was born. Khan's election was filled with tension. On the first full day in office, in his official first act, Khan went to the National Holocaust Commemoration in London. This was a very important gesture for unity and because it dispelled any feeling that people might have that Khan holds the same feelings towards Jews as does Ken Livingstone, a former Labour Party London mayor, who was removed from the Labour Party recently for making statements comparing Israel and Hitler. Actually, Livingstone said recently that it would have been better had Israel never been created. In a previous position, Khan headed Ed Miliband's successful election team, and that thrust him into politics. It should be noted that Miliband and his twin brother, both important political labor leaders, came from and continue to be active and proud Jews. While Khan is undeniably Muslim, it is clear that he does not toe the Muslim line. There was even a fatwa, a religious edict, pronounced against him because of his support for same-sex marriage. Britain's Labour Party has its fair share of anti-Semites, and they are getting more and more obnoxious. But I do not see Khan as one of them. Actually, I would guess that a trip to Israel is in the works. Even by the end of the summer, we might see Khan in Israel. More on international affairs. Rhetoric between Iran and the United States is ratcheting higher. The Iranian Supreme Leader has called attention to U.S. naval activity in the Straits of Hormuz. He reminded the world that Iran controls the Straits, and the United States is permitted there only by Iranian largesse. And the deputy head of Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard announced on Iranian national television that if the United States continues its aggression against Iran, Iran will close the Straits to the United States and her allies. Them's fighting words. 1/3 of the world's oil passes through the Straits of Hormuz every single day. I cannot determine if this is rhetoric and if the rhetoric is an onset of new tensions between the United States and Iran, or if it's a revival of old tensions. What I can say at this moment is that Iran is speaking very boldly. In a Senate hearing, the United States Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff laid out an unusually clear and detailed description of what the United States is doing to disrupt and attack ISIS through cyber attacks. The objective is to disrupt ISIS's chain of communication and prevent them from moving their money and even to block their access to their money. The U.S. Cyber Command Center, headquartered in Tampa, Florida, is spoofing ISIS and disturbing the very heart of the Islamic State. The U.S. cyber team is trying to isolate ISIS. According to Ash Carter, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, quote, "The objectives there are to interrupt ISIL command and control, interrupt its ability to move money around, interrupt its ability to tyrannize and control population, interrupt its ability to recruit externally," unquote. And of course he continues, all of that it does in a cyber-enabled way. One of the 27 U.S. cyber teams is dedicated exclusively to ISIS. It's made up of many Arabic speakers and hackers. U.S. cyber teams are a combination of military and civilian contractors specializing in hacking. Eventually, there'll be 133 different teams, each team composed of 45 to 60 people. In the end, this division will have 6,187 people hacking. We can call them cyber warriors. They are coordinating their cyber attacks with their ground strikes. Part of the U.S. objective in cyber attacking ISIS is to take away their method of communication, including their handheld devices. The United States can shut down those devices, but tapping them and tracking them leads to better results. This, by the way, is something the U.S. defense leaders did not say in their testimony. For some time now, ISIS has preferred using handheld phones and texting as opposed to the internet. And of course, the U.S. cyber team is also attacking recruiters and other ISIS sources in Europe and throughout the rest of the world. Most dangerous of all is that ISIS has contracted outside freelance hackers to do their bidding. According to the Senate testimony, the U.S. cyber team has been monitoring and dealing with them too. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that Jews and Judaism has had an intimate knowledge of medicine and healing since the time of the Bible? The Talmud is filled with medical treatments. Rabbis became doctors. The most talented rabbis took on the study of medicine. The most famous was Maimonides, his Greek name. He was a physician to the king of Egypt. His Hebrew name was Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, and known by his acronym Rambam. Jews were not permitted to legally enter medical school until the University of Padua in Italy opened in 1222, allowing Jews to enter. Only the best young rabbis were selected to go. It transformed medicine and the Jewish world. An interesting tidbit, every student in Padua in the medical school needed their own cadaver. All the other students stole the dead bodies from the Jewish cemetery or hired someone to steal them because Jewish bodies were buried whole and untouched. So there are actually rabbinic responsa questions and answers asked by these young rabbis, medical students, to their rabbis if they had permission to desecrate the Jewish cemetery and defile a Jewish body as part of their medical studies. Medicine, just another example of how Jews have influenced and changed the world. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.